We're going to be talking today about a New Year's cleanse. And this is a really important topic because there are so many different ways to do detoxes and cleanses, and they get really promoted, especially in social media. And we want to talk to you guys about ways to really understand safe versions and some of the medical literature that supports doing this kind of thing. So I'm Dr. Molly Force from Prosper Natural Health. I'm the clinical director here, and I'm joined by Dr. Rosalie de Lombaert. And we have a holistic wellness center here in Port Townsend. And part of what we do with our patients is to make sure that they are really getting safe advice and making sure that they're getting clinically relevant treatments. And so one of the things we like to do is to do these doc talks every month. So thank you so much for joining us. And we have all of our recordings from our previous doc talks from the last few years online. So make sure to check out our website. We're going to be referring back to a few of those today as well. So while we're talking about the cleanse components today, some of the really important questions that we want to make sure that we're covering is, this question of why should I even potentially do a cleanse, and what is a cleanse? What makes up a detox program or a cleanse? And then what's happening to my body when I'm engaging in a detox or cleanse process? And we are going to talk about the biomechanics of that and the microbiology that goes along with that. And then specifically, we're going to also talk about how the microbiome can respond to dietary changes during a cleanse and the benefits that we can expect from cleansing. So cleansing is a very, very old practice within human history. We see this being done as a rite of passage in many cultures. It can be integrated into religious and spiritual practices, and can also be used in post-infectious states, so after people are recovering from different disease processes. So typically when we're talking about cleansing, we're talking about an aspect of detoxification, and that actually, as much of a buzzword as it is a medical term, and a term we see in the scientific literature. And we're going to talk about what that means to detoxify. And then typically when we're talking about a cleanse, we're talking about a set period of time that we're doing a cleanse or modification of our lifestyle and our diet, and perhaps supplementing during a set period of time. And we'll talk about some of those options as well. And then we know that there are many different types of cleanses out there today. You may have heard of one called the brat diet, which is the banana, rice, applesauce toast. There's mono diet cleanses where you're just eating one major food. There are cleanses that you can purchase that are meal replacement shakes. And then we also see things like juice fasts and water fast cleanses as well. We're going to talk about some of the reasons why we are recommending certain types of cleansing for our patient population. So we've got great benefits that can come from cleanses when they're done in a safe and appropriate way. One of the coolest parts about doing a cleanse to me is that it's really can be very supportive of the diversity of our microbiome. So remember, that's your good flora that's inoculated all over your body. And when we are supporting with more anti-inflammatory foods and making these positive changes, we can often increase the diversity of our microbiome. And a lot of that comes just simply from adding more plant fibers, which contain those prebiotics, which are foods for our probiotics. We also know that a cleanse can really diminish stress that's going on for the body and reduce inflammation, both localized inflammation, whether it's something like a rash that somebody's dealing with, or more of a systemic inflammation. And we also know that it can reduce stress on the digestive tract. It also can normalize bowel movements, and that plays into this microbiome feedback piece that we get. And then we also have the potential for regulating weight and also supporting mental clarity and supporting a mental and emotional reset. So sometimes a cleanse can be a really nice catalyst for that next step or a change, a positive change made in our life.
Thanks, Dr. Molly. I'll take over here. So the first piece is a cleanse is ultimately a microbiome reset, right? So what you were eating prior, it changes because what you're eating now during your cleanse is different. That ultimately changes the microbiomes, the microbiome and the various bacterial and yeast species that are present in that microbiome. So probiotics we think of are just these additional pieces, these additional helpers that sustain microbial diversity. Pro meaning for, biotic meaning life. So ultimately, the microbiome, or maybe I should say, the human condition is that 9 out of 10 cells is microbial in origin, which means we are 1 in 10 cells human. We wouldn't exist without the broad diversity of our microbes all over our skin, in various parts of our body, and especially in our GI tract. So the foods that we eat, and especially those plant fiber foods that aren't well digested by our own GI tract, they end up being digested by our microbiome. And those are the ones that are prebiotic and support that microbiome. Your gut microbes interact directly with the brain. They interact through this gut-brain axis. So there's actually studies that show that a certain type of microbiome with an overgrowth of certain bacteria can leads to mood disorders, whether it's depression or anxiety or even schizophrenia. So it's just really, this is an area of huge growth right now in the scientific literature. All in all, the healthiest microbe is one that is biodiverse. And so in talking about a cleanse, we do a microbiome reset to ultimately get to this place where the microbiome is more diverse. And so thinking, checking in with ourselves, how do we recognize an imbalanced microbiome? Well, first of all, we think about this concept of dysbiosis. Dys meaning off, biosis, again, life. So dysbiosis in the microbiome is just, there's a disruption of the normal microbial balance. Got it. This happens because usually there's a monoculture that has set up somewhere in the GI tract. So this gets diagnosed as SIBO sometimes. If you've heard of SIBO, it's small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So this monoculture, this one type of bacteria or these few types of bacteria take over the soil that's otherwise the biodiverse garden that's supposed to be your microbiome. Symptoms of this would be fatigue, meal-related energy changes, low appetite or feeling easily full, having indigestion or heartburn. Biggest one that I end up seeing clinically is just, belching, flatulence, bloating, and just, in a way that's just hard to control. Additionally, abdominal pain or discomfort, malaise, constipation, diarrhea. It can look in very different ways for different people. That's where this Bristol stool chart comes in handy because it tells us, okay, type 1, very hard lumps, hard to pass, whereas type 7 is just watery, no solid pieces. That tells us also about the microbiome, what is present. Same thing here, incomplete, frequent, voluminous bowel movements. That tells us there's an imbalanced microbiome. And then lastly, those related diagnoses could be IBS or SIBO. So diving into the research, since these doc talks are opportunities for us as doctors to really dig into the primary literature and see, okay, what can we find on this topic that we can share with patients? Here's a research article that's brand new from May 2023 that talks about the gut microbiome and brain connection, okay, that gut-brain axis I talked about earlier. And what it just confirms here is that a dysbiosis of the intestinal microbiome is a documented factor in the pathogenesis of various conditions. So in the creation of illnesses, including a plethora of mental, metabolic, digestive disorders. That's a pretty bold statement that these scientists have made in this research trial. So several mechanisms end up being proposed for this gut to brain communication, including microbial metabolites, immune system, how the immune system either gets upregulated or downregulated, the neurons, so the nervous system, metabolic pathways, whether it's related to insulin or blood sugar. All of those mechanisms can be prone to dietary modulation, which just means if you change your diet, you're changing your risk factors for you're promoting a healthy gut-brain connection. It's a pretty stark, pretty amazing research article, honestly.
So to be able to have that chance to work on shifting your microbiome and really getting a reset is a really beautiful component of what a cleanse should be able to provide. Now, we also know that cleanses are really another way to get a detoxification pathways started for the body. So we know that there's a toxic burden that all of us has. And these are often described as a buildup of xenobiotics, which means they're external chemical pressures for our systems, and internal components that we've made through natural metabolism. Maybe they're hormones that have been broken down. So we all have a certain amount of toxic load. And we know from the literature that toxic exposure increases our risk of chronic disease and chronic inflammation, which is very degenerating. So we've identified toxins as certain chemicals, like we know pesticides and herbicides and BPAs and a lot of our pollution and heavy metals, those have been well documented to be part of our toxic burden. We also know that there can be microbial toxic burden that happens from these things called endotoxins, which means these toxins that are happening inside of us that are being created by the metabolites of certain bacteria or fungus, for example, with things like LPS and then mold spores. And then there are also food metabolites too. So we want to be thinking about ways to utilize a cleanse to really stimulate these detoxifications to lower that amount of heavy burden that we all carry. Now, this is a nice little image here about what goes on well when we have proper metabolic toxin removal from the body. And we wanted to make sure we went over this with you guys today because this is really important. This is where we get the difference between a healthy cleanse detox option and a very potentially damaging one. So what should be happening is we have here in the colon, as these chemicals, these toxicants are being processed, they need to be sent to the liver, and then the liver needs to recognize them first. That's stage one. It needs to be able to recognize that it's a toxicant that should not be in the body and tag it. Phase two part of liver detox over here, it neutralizes it. And in doing that, it creates water as a byproduct and makes it so that it can be flushed out through the kidneys. Okay, some of the chemicals are going to be flushed out through the colon, but a lot are going to be processed through the liver, tagged, neutralized, and then eliminated out through the kidney. So that's phase one and phase two that happens in the liver. And we're going to be coming back and talking about this. Now, if things are not working well and the body is not able to tag and recognize and do the first part of phase one detoxification in the liver, then we get all kinds of problems with these toxins continuing to circulate through the body. If phase two is not completed, then what happens in phase one when these toxicants are tagged actually make them even more chemically damaging to the body. And remember, the body is wise, so it's trying to reduce the amount of impact that these negative toxins have on it. So it's going to try to store it. And the place that it seems to store these toxicants when phase two cannot happen through the liver is in kind of unfortunate places. We see them stored in the fat and we see them stored in the brain. And this is a big deal for us because that could lead to neural inflammation, degenerative changes with the brain. And then when we're thinking about these kind of toxicants being stored in the fat, if at any time in the future we're undergoing weight loss, those kind of things, then we're having these toxicants re-released into the body. So this is a nice little image that you guys can refer back to about phase one and phase two pathways in the liver. We've got, you may have heard of the cytochrome P450 pathway. It's one of the best analyzed enzymatic pathways for liver clearance that there is. And this is where those toxins are being tagged, and in phase two, they're being neutralized. And through that process, there are many cofactors that are required for both phase one. So take a quick look at those. We've got the B vitamins there. Phase two, we've got more of our sulfur-rich amino acids and some of our B vitamins showing up there. And we need those sulfur components for this elimination through the water-soluble system. So that's a big deal, because if we are doing a cleanse that is making us stay stuck in phase one, we're potentially going to feel worse when we're doing the cleanse. And we hear patients talking about that from some of the over-the-counter cleanses that they do, or sometimes when they're doing certain fasts. And what's happening is they're running out of these cofactor nutrients that are required for this phase two to denature these toxicants and help change them so that they can chemically leave the body.
So ultimately, we have high micronutrient needs, and especially during a cleanse, which is why, when we get to the slides later, we'll talk about how do we replete you for all of these metabolic needs, these cofactors, these micronutrients that will help your liver do its job. This is a buzzword here, endotoxemia. We might start to see this in the next couple of years come mainstream, but this is a concept that's ultimately a measurable condition from dysbiosis. So your microbiome is not optimal, not biodiverse. And it ultimately is a measure of metabolic toxicity. So it tells us about a sluggish liver, and it tells us about a microbiome that's not optimal. The way we measure it is through this marker known as LPS. It's a component of bacterial cell walls. The body doesn't like this. It mounts an inflammation reaction, and especially as there's more of it present, there's more inflammation. Some of the causes of this increased LPS and endotoxemia is a diet that's high in refined sugars, even our just regular grains, whether it's white rice or potatoes, high carb, even from the plant world. Flour grains as well, and hydrogenated oils, saturated fats, the ones that sort of, again, are more inflammatory. That can be a precursor for endotoxemia and set you up for that. This type of diet, one that's high in refined sugars, high grain, high hydrogenated fats, will induce pro-inflammatory changes, which means ultimately more inflammation in the GI tract that leads to external sort of systemic whole body inflammation. Long-term effects is that it's very closely linked with risk of cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes, right? So it's not just that a high sugar diet can contribute to high type 2 diabetes, but it's actually endotoxemia. Your microbiome changes as well. Detoxification is the goal of a cleanse as well. There's several factors present. It's eliminating those external exogenous toxins known as xenobiotics. So if you do a Google search of that term, you'll see, oh, wow, it's our plastics, our chemicals, our air pollution. Elimination of that so that the liver doesn't have to do it. And also elimination of those endogenous toxins, the ones that are made internally from just, again, phase 1 liver detox. We've got to stimulate the excretory organs, make sure they're working well, whether it's the kidneys, whether it's the colon or the skin or the respiratory system. These are all ways to get toxins out. Another piece here is supporting that microbiome diversity. And this is where, again, another plug in for plant fibers of a lot of varieties and probiotics or fermented foods. Last piece here that is a really big one is that supporting the mitochondria, which are organelles within each of our body cells, will support also detoxification. Mitochondria require a lot of the same cofactors and micronutrients that the liver does. Okay, so supporting the mitochondria, ultimately, these are our energy providers. Supporting the energy means we've got more energy to clean up the toxins, move things along. And more energy ultimately to feel more energized, to not quite have quite so much fatigue after exercise or whatnot. So here's a deep dive into the research again in looking at detox diets. And there's some good research out there on just this umbrella term. And this is one from 2015 that showed that there's several detox diets have been clinically undertaken and monitored. And it's noticing and evaluating the effects of foods and food-derived components on those detox pathways, including, again, these phase 1 and phase 2 liver detox steps. So this research showed that, yes, ultimately, we are supporting the liver with a detox diet, which is just nice to see it written out in the primary literature, even though it makes sense biochemically. It's just using human subjects. Yes, we have seen that the liver ends up being supported by these nutrient-dense, cleanse-type detox diets.
Here's a nice article that came out this May that talks about the importance of antioxidants in providing that phase 2 detoxification enzyme process to be able to have it. So those cofactors. And in this study, they used a rehydratable shake. So it was like a protein powder shake that had a whole bunch of antioxidants in there as well. And then they were checking people's glutathione levels in particular to see if they had changes in their antioxidant status. And then they were also looking at some of their clearance of several other blood related markers. So they're making sure that by having enough antioxidants, we can turn that cellular crank that's required for the liver to do that phase 2 detoxification. Another piece of literature that came out in 2020, this one is talking specifically about if we make a diet and lifestyle intervention, can we change endotoxemia? Can we induce a change in those LPS levels? And we can, and that was the coolest part about this study. So it said, not only did it help with BMI and body fat and the waist and hip circumference, but it also helped, we think even more importantly here at our clinic, it helped with reducing that endotoxemia, which can be so problematic. So here's one way we look at microbiome at Prosper. We often are asking our patients to do stool testing for this. And stool testing has come a long ways since I graduated med school. It's now available with PCR methods. It's just so much more accurate and just really cool to get a good snapshot of what's going on with somebody's microbiome in their intestinal tract. So this one is offered by Genova, and this is a test that we'll use. And it has some really nice extra data on there besides just the flora analysis. It shows different digestive markers like the pancreatic elastase. It gives us ideas about if there's inflammation going on. Calprotectin is a very well studied and used in even conventional medicine way to look at inflammation for the gut. And then it also tells us, of course, about different metabolite imbalances that can happen from dysbiotic or abnormal flora. And then checks to see if there's any microbial infections that are happening as well.
Another way to test the microbiome, another take-home test, is this GI map stool test, which has 6 pages worth of information on the microbiome. So whether it's pathogenic bacteria, viruses, yeast, and not just Candida, but other yeasts, whether it's the helpful bacteria and in what ratio they exist amidst one another, or opportunistic bacteria, the ones that also hold a potential for triggering autoimmunity. More on that later. It also tells us about inflammation markers, not just the calprotectin, but other markers, pancreatic enzymes as well, fecal fat, is there blood in the stool? And lastly, part of why I end up running this test more often is because it has that additional marker we can add on of zonulin, which tells us directly about leaky gut. So next page will tell us more about zonulin. So leaky gut is this concept of intestinal permeability. So what should be happening is that the internal sort of gut lining is nice and taut. The food gets digested within it and chaperoned to the bloodstream. When there's leaky gut, there is an opening in between the cells of the GI tract, which means that food proteins pass through this inflamed GI tract straight into the bloodstream. So a full big gluten protein ends up in the bloodstream and it's not supposed to be there. It's not fully digested. It doesn't have a chaperone with it. So the body sees it and tags it, understandably, and attacks it and removes it. This is a whole lot of inflammation. And the immune system is smart. It remembers this from before so that anytime it happens again, it's just quicker and quicker at causing inflammation from a specific food protein. This type of intestinal permeability is measurable via the presence of a zonulin protein in the stool. Zonulin is basically the wrench that pulls apart those cells to make a nice big hole from the intestines to the bloodstream. It was identified, it's protein identified first in the early 2000s, so it hasn't been around all that long. These zonulin proteins disassemble the tight junction, the glue between those intestinal cells, separating it, creating a direct entry to the bloodstream. Evolutionarily, zonulin was there to help as a defense mechanism. For example, if you ingested bacteria that caused gastroenteritis, so a whole, stomach upset, the body wants to tag that as quick as it can in the immune system so that you can recover as quick as you can. So zonulin is there to say, okay, open door for figuring out what this is and attacking it. What is not great with this approach is that alongside it comes all of the food proteins that we're not supposed to be reacting to, that aren't invaders. They're just present in the bloodstream in this case. A leaky gut can also suggest potentially leaky other barriers, whether it's your gut-brain barrier or the barrier between the genitourinary tract. So when I see a leaky gut and a positive zonulin, I think about the rest of the body, not just the GI tract. There's 2 currently known triggers for zonulin to be produced. There's more triggers postulated, but the two known ones are a small exposure to large amounts of bacteria. In the case I described above, gastroenteritis, bacterial gastroenteritis, or potential bacterial overgrowth or dysbiosis, right? So it's just all coming back together with how important it is to have a diverse microbiome. The second piece, the second known trigger of this zonulin secretion is gluten exposure. So it's just, again, really interesting to think about how much gluten is present in our everyday lives in the Western world, and potentially how it could be making some of us more sick than we expected with just promoting zonulin and thus promoting intestinal permeability.
So where we really start to get into problem state here is when the body is seeing these foods, which should be kind of healthy for us, and instead thinking that it needs to have this huge immune reaction, and then even worse, can then tag our own self tissues. And that becomes this state of autoimmunity. So there's something called molecular mimicry, where chunks of the DNA from, say, our food looks just like these foreign proteins that the body's seen before, maybe bacterial, maybe viral, or maybe even another food that leaked in because of a disrupted zonulin system and leaky gut or intestinal permeability. And all of a sudden, we get self tissues that start becoming tagged. And there is documentation in the medical literature from that happening specifically with casein, which is found in milk, specifically tagging the myelin sheath. And we think about that in MS and how the myelin sheath surrounds our nerve cells. We also see with the gliadin protein, which is part of the glutinous grains, that has a similar proteome, so has molecular mimicry to the thyroid. So we have problems here. Once the intestinal system becomes dysregulated, we all of a sudden are seeing immune system dysregulated. And so we know, and this is just a more recent study from 2020, that intestinal permeability, aka leaky gut, increases the risk of chronic disease. And we know that that is very problematic for us in having this extra inflammation that's going on for the body, and then autoimmunity starting up for some people.
So here's kind of our take-home slide. We talked a whole lot about what can go wrong with the microbiome and how do we reset? What is the goal of health, of reaching optimal health here? And so, the way I like to think about this is, how do we support our inner gardens, which is our microbiome? And when we think of our beautiful gardens, it's just a biodiversity of plants. Everyone's healthy, living well together, and it's weeded, right? We don't have an overgrowth of blackberry in this patch and horsetail over here, So taking care of your inner garden has a lot of components. One of those is to eat many plants of many colors and many varieties. And the goal of that is to get enough prebiotics, the plant fibers, to ultimately feed your microbiome. If you're eating a diet that's high in refined carbs, you're feeding just one type of cell, or one or a couple types of bacteria or yeast even. That's setting you up for a monoculture. Part of this is decreasing empty calories, reaching for nutrient density. Nutrient density comes in all colors. Okay, so I tell my pediatric patients to eat the rainbow. I tell my adult patients to reach for sulfurous greens, dark leafy greens, and brightly colored greens. That ends up being a recommendation in all of my patients. Eating fermented foods, again, it's going to be the probiotic boost for sort of seeding your garden to promote biodiversity. Removing xenoestrogens is coming back up again. These are going to negate the beneficial effects. These are kind of like your pesticides, and ultimately they are pesticides and plastics that come in through our orally through our food source. Stress management, some sort of meditative practice, some sort of breath work practice that is getting you into the rest and digest nervous system is going to promote ideal digestion and thus is going to promote microbial biodiversity. Exercise movement practice for so many reasons, but indeed also supports the microbiome. And then lastly here, partaking in a cleanse, whether it's annually, seasonally, or daily with some sort of intermittent fasting to kind of reset the gut and sort of reseed the garden for that biodiversity. So here's where we're gonna encourage you to join us for our New Year's cleanse, and Dr. Molly and I are both gonna do this as well. And this New Year's cleanse has multiple aspects to it, right? Of course, the diet is going to be one that's pretty closely anti-inflammatory, whole foods, closely monitored, where we're avoiding added sugars. Added sugars, like I said, just sets up your petri dish for a monoculture. We want to prevent that over fermentation. Movement practice, aerobic exercise, again, supporting the microbiome, supporting the neurotransmitters, supporting circulation so that all of these immune cells and detox pathways can work optimally. Stress reduction, whether it's in whatever your favorite way to do it is, meditation, journaling, enjoyable activities, promoting sleep. These are all just ways to, again, boost your rest and digest nervous system so that it's not in fight or flight all the time. That is not promotive to a healthy microbiome. Sleep is on there too because sleep is healing. So some way to help normalize your sleep if you're having insomnia is also part of this regimen. I like to think about sleep being the time during the 24-hour day where you're finishing up your digestion of your physical food, but you're also doing mental digestion. So that is just just an important piece of the puzzle here. And then lastly, per this cleanse, we'll have some supplementation on board to get you the micronutrients and the cofactors for supporting your cellular health and those mitochondria, as well as the phase 1 and phase 2 liver detox enzymes. It's a 14-day cleanse, and so the supplementation is 14 days worth. The rest of the stuff that can be ongoing, right? This can be a catalyst for change ultimately, to opt for a diet that's less lower in refined sugars, to opt to build onto your habits of movement practice, right? So you get to decide that duration, but the supplements will be at least 14 days.
So Dr. Rosalie and I have used many different types of cleanse products and detox products. And for this one, we decided to go with Designs for Health's 14-day detox programs. And what we really like about these is that it provides those cofactor nutrients that are so important for that phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. It's really rich in antioxidants, and it's going to provide the adequate protein. So it's really wonderful to not feel hungry for part of this when you're giving up so many different additive foods that you might have had normally in your diet that may have been higher in sugar or simple carbohydrates like breads and noodles and those kind of things. So there are two different options here, and the first one is a vegetarian version. So there's a vegetarian version versus a paleo version. This vegetarian version will come in a big container. It's quite large. And in there, you're going to actually get a protein powder that includes a whole bunch of multivitamins. You can see them listed out here. And there's about 17 grams of protein per serving there per packet. And then you'll also get these little packets that are filled with the antioxidant and amino acid nutrients in them. And you take the protein powder and the capsules morning and night. And it also comes with a little booklet. And in the booklet, there are suggestions for diet changes. And then they also explain how to choose certain food groups that can be helpful. This is not a restricted cleanse in that you can still eat with breakfast and dinner, but you can also choose to minimize food intake at that point too, because the protein powder is an option to be an alternative to a large meal. So you should feel satiated with that. The big other piece that comes in this is a little shaker bottle. The cleanse powder we found is pretty darn clumpy. And at first, for years, we were getting these and I never used the shaker bottle myself. I was like, this is silly. But it turns out this is an amazing little apparatus. It has what looks like a little egg-sized whisk in it that shakes, and it helps really emulsify and break apart the clumpiness of those protein powders. So you could add these powders to a shake or something like that, but just adding water or a dairy-free alternative milk sort of style thing to shake these up works really well. So this is the pea protein veggie version, and all of the recommendations for there are non-animal sources of protein in the diet book that comes with that. The paleo version, there's two different flavors. There's chocolate and strawberry vanilla. And unfortunately, Designs for Health actually has these on back order right now, the paleo versions, but I expect that they'll be back in pretty soon. And we have some of them here at Prosper if anyone is interested in them. But what I like about this is they use a hydrolyzed beef bone broth protein, and it has that multivitamin component. So it's got those B vitamins and all of those really critical cofactors for that phase 1 and phase 2 detox. Of course, it contains your antioxidants as well. And this one is, free of dairy and grains and soy and legumes. So it's another option. Here are some of the really important ingredients, which is why we decided to go with this version of cleanse. So it's got our adequate amino acids. We've got enough protein to really suffice when we're making major dietary changes and going towards an anti-inflammatory diet, so people aren't hungry or grouchy or feeling like they're not getting enough nutrients in. It contains those really important cofactors. We've kind of talked about that. It's got everything from your B complex and folate to your A, C, and E vitamins, and then several minerals that are required for that detoxification. It also contains glutathione and N-acetylcysteine. So they did a really good job at Designs for Health actually providing many of these antioxidants that are very potent antioxidants, and even the precursors for those. So that's what that N-acetylcysteine is the precursor to our very powerful glutathione. Glutathione can pass through blood-brain barrier, so it's just a great antioxidant for protection whenever we're doing a detox and cleanse and mobilizing these toxicants out of our tissues. Of course, they contain these sulfur-containing compounds, and so we're always looking for those whenever we're recommending any kind of detox or cleanse products. We need to have those on board to do that safe phase 2 detoxification so people do not become more toxic when they're doing a cleanse. And they also contain that B12 and folate, which is really critical for this methylation step, which is a chemical transformation step, biotransformation step that happens to SAMe, which is a really important part of our sulfur pathway. It also contains calcium D-glucarate. Now, many of you might know what that is. It's a pretty cool substance that helps with something called glucuronidation. Now, glucuronidation happens on the level of the intestinal layer, and it's important for removing toxins, including excess hormones that we're making out. So with glucuronidation not working, we get high levels of beta glucuronidase, and that puts us at higher risk of breast, um, uterine cancer, prostate cancer, and colon cancer. So we don't like high levels of that. So this is an antioxidant that helps specifically with the brush border of the colon to get those toxins out. And then it also has molybdenum. Now, molybdenum is a really important mineral. It's one of our essential minerals, and it helps with this sulfur dioxide component. And we see this helping for detoxing things like caffeine and sulfites that we see naturally occurring in things like wine as a food preservative and dried fruit. And we even see it naturally occurring in some vinegars. And then, of course, it has these antioxidants as well added in. So not just our vitamin antioxidants like our CEA, but also it has selenium, one of our mineral antioxidants, but it has green tea extract, glutathione, that antioxidant, and then it also has several veggie and fruit juice extracts as well. So those are really important for that protection against the damage from the phase 1 byproducts. And finally, it also contains inositol, milk thistle, and choline. And we know that those help with that healthy bile production, which is part of our gallbladder's role in its communication with the liver for toxin excretion. It has that milk thistle active ingredient silymarin in it, which we know helps reduce some of the oxidative stress on the liver. And there's lots of research out there about that. And then it contains a very specific form of soluble fat fiber, which can really also help the colon remove those toxicants. So that's another really important component to any cleanse that you're choosing, to make sure that there's a fiber component there.
So, we dove pretty deep into the biochemistry here because I think we both really like to nerd out about this stuff. But we also want to give you sort of the scientific information as to why, we're recommending what we're recommending. And so, this section of the Doc Talk is where we talk about, okay, kind of big picture questions and, big picture, what are the organs doing? So a frequently asked question is, well, am I fasting for part of this? The answer is no. This is not a fast. We don't necessarily want you to go into ketosis. And the reason is we want to keep the elimination pathways open, which includes the colon. So we want to have regular bowel movements to support specifically that phase 2 detox pathway of the liver. So looking at the liver, this is such an important organ during the cleanse. Foods that support the liver are our bitter foods. So our dark leafy greens or our sort of citrus peels, things like that. Those are all very bitter foods that are going to help support the liver with detox. Foods that are high in antioxidants, especially glutathione. So when we think of glutathione antioxidant, we think of supporting the liver and the lung fields as well, so both of those being excretory organs. So our sulfurous foods, cabbage, broccoli, garlic, these are all going to support the sulfur step of liver detox. And then our colored foods, beets, as well as things like carrots, are going to be supporting the antioxidant step of liver detox. And then lastly, our salad greens are going to help with the micronutrients necessary for all these steps. And lemon juice as well, again, kind of from the bitter foods perspective, in that it helps with secretion of enzymes. Herbs that I end up using for additional support, and this can be an herbal tea, is cinnamon or dandelion. Those are really delicious together as a tea, a morning tea, if you choose to add that in as well.
As far as our colon and our intestines, of course, these are going to be excreting that solid waste. So we really want to make sure that we're not having a recirculation with that. So we're thinking about things like our fibers, both insoluble and soluble, making sure we're getting adequate water while we're doing a cleanse or a detox, and then making sure that we're reseeding with good probiotics or choosing foods that are rich in probiotics naturally, like certain ferments, sauerkraut, maybe dairy-free yogurts or kefirs, those kind of things. We also know that high fiber foods like lentils can be really helpful, and many of our root veggies can be really helpful for those fibers as well as our leafy greens. And then we've got good research behind the garlic and onions being helpful as well. And then in regards to herbs, since we'd be remiss as naturopaths not to mention them, things like aloe and things like psyllium husk can be helpful in addition if you feel like you need that extra support with your colon. So this is a question we get all the time is like, am I going to be pooping all the time when I'm doing this cleanse or detox? And the question is really, it depends. Not typically though, there could be some bowel changes because remember, this is an opportunity to really change your microbiome for the better and work on that biodiversity. So sometimes there can be increased elimination initially, but typically we like to see 1 to 3 well-formed bowel movements a day. And if we do have stool changes that are happening during the cleanse, then typically they're resolving towards the end of the cleanse and people are ending with a more healthy, balanced gut microbiome that's supportive of that.
Another of our excretory organs are the kidneys. And of course, thinking back to phase 2 detoxification, the next place of excreting those toxins that have been tagged and moved along by the liver is through the kidneys. And so, of course, we've got to stay hydrated. And additionally, we can push the kidneys a little bit with our gentle herbal diuretics. Parsley, cilantro, nettle, alfalfa, very much within that family. And then some other renal tonic foods and herbs include cranberry and juniper berry. Those support the kidney tissue. Lungs, it's really important. We forget about the lungs. They're a huge part of our excretory system. We exhale and we exhale toxins that way. If we are breathing in anxiously all the time, it's not supporting an exhale that is eliminating the toxins. And so this comes back to whether you can add in a movement practice, a cardio practice. The point is to open up the lungs as an excretory organ. So foods that support with the lung tissue are spicy foods. And this is so curious because even in Ayurveda, in Ayurvedic medicine, one of the lung tonics is pipali or long pepper. So it's something that we give Ayurvedically to support the lung excretion, moving mucus out. Slippery and soothing textures, things like aloe or slippery elm, again, you're supporting the lung tissue moving and slipping on itself because they're slippery organs. They're not two balloons. So these are foods to add into your anti-inflammatory diet, including the dark leafy greens, our mustard greens, turnips, radish, wasabi, cayenne. You see again, the spice comes back pretty high. Skin, our largest excretory organ. Ways to support skin detox. Again, water comes back really as our primary source. And then thinking about our antioxidant varieties. So again, eating the rainbow here, blueberries, purple cabbage, beets, and then healthy fats from walnuts, sunflower seeds. Herbs like oat straw are going to help with just building the collagen, and nettle as well with helping the inflammatory components, calming those down in the skin. I'll give that to my eczema patients. The lymphatic system is where things build up when they're not on the inside and they're not in the bloodstream. And the lymph system gets activated when you're sick, for example, right? Your lymph nodes will swell. That's a whole bunch of data that's just collected in a space that the immune system can look at closely. And so, ways to support the lymph system is actually first and foremost a movement practice. Because our own muscles are the ones that move the lymph. And secondly, herbs and foods that support circulation. So think of your ginger, your turmeric, your lemon. Seaweed, curiously enough, is on here as well. It's got some cofactors that help the immune system. And then garlic, again, circulatory stimulant. Herbs that will help in this realm as well. Golden seal, astragalus, echinacea. These are your immune boosting herbs that ultimately help the lymphatic system. And so, again, another plug in here from a movement practice is just somehow getting the lungs to breathe heavier, getting the skin to sweat. This is also part of the greater idea of a cleanse. And what's amazing now post-pandemic is that our yoga studio is open again at Prosper. So we actually have some yoga instructors who do hot yoga coming in on a regular basis, 5:30 Tuesdays and Thursday nights, to just get a yoga routine in. And the point is to sweat. The point is to open that skin excretory organ.
So we want to just invite you guys, if you do want to do that cleanse, you can either swing by Prosper and grab a cleanse kit if you want to do the component that involves the supplementation, or you can go on our website at prospernaturalhealth.com and there's an e-store drop down option. And if you go to that, you can go onto the Designs for Health website there and order your cleanse kits through that. There's also some 21-day options for folks that want to do that instead of a 14-day cleanse. So there are many different options. And of course, if you want us to individualize something, or if you have a concern about how to do a cleanse with your own dietary needs, it's something that we do quite a bit. We also want to invite you to come to our Doc Talk in February, and that one's going to be all about supplements specifically for joint health and what we've seen in the medical literature and in practice that have helped people with osteoarthritis, in particular degenerative joint disease, just that natural aging process and joint degeneration that happens, how we can help with that. So it's so great that everyone came today. Are there any questions?